Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the panel discussions on the second day of Warsaw Capital Markets Summit 2014 conference. You will have the opportunity today to listen to three debates. On the role of the state in shaping financial markets, on the financing of infrastructure investments, and on large and medium-sized enterprises. Let me just remind you that between 9:30 this morning until 1:30, various companies will be making their presentations in Nautilus room on the first floor of Stock Exchange Center. And those interested in attending these sessions are warmly invited to do so. At the moment, a private training company from Belarus, Europt, is making its presentation. At 10:30, it will be Uniter, another company from Belarus. At 11:30, you can hear from Trophy Resort Nirt, a chain of hotels and spa resorts from Hungary. And at 12:30, you'll be able to learn about Fenghua Soletek AG, a Chinese footwear producer. And now I would invite you to take part in our first panel discussion entitled From Privatization to Asset Management, Evolution of the State's Role. And the panelists who are already with us include Nadeza Curcic, a project manager from the Privatization Agency in Serbia. A very warm welcome. Rafael Szczepaniak, managing director at Goldman Sachs. Jarosław Grzesiak, legal attorney at Greenberg, Traurig. Wojciech Kowalczyk, Under Secretary of State at the Polish Ministry of Treasury. Piotr Wiła, Director of Global Banking and Markets at Bank Zachodni WBK. And the panel moderator is Piotr Olendski, a Director and Head of Corporate Finance at Deutsche Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and first of all, I would like to welcome all the guests of our today's event. I would like to start with a very brief introduction in order not to steal the floor from the panelists, but just setting this scene for our discussion. I think it's very important to say that privatization has been a very important event in Poland and also elsewhere in Europe. There has been different models of privatization as well as the different paces. I think if we look very briefly towards the Western Europe, the privatization has been supporting the economic policy and was aimed at the restructuring enterprises and to help the fiscal policy. In CE, mainly, it has been as the part of the transformation of the economy. I think after the 25 years of the transformation of the economy, we have reached the situation that also the role of the Ministry of State Treasury in Poland and different agencies across the board in CE has also transformed from the just pure privatization to very much more active asset management. One way to say that privatization proceeds only in Poland has brought 150 billion zloty during the last 25 years. With this short introduction, I would like to start with a question. I would like to start the question, and first question I would like to direct to the Minister Kowalczyk. Poland has a wealth of experience and unique track record on privatization with numbers of landmark transactions successfully executed over the transformation period. How do you perceive the current challenges ahead of the Polish Minister of State Treasury in the view of the 25 years of the transformation?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this question. A couple numbers at the beginning. As you already mentioned, we have started the privatization process in 1990. Since 1990, the total privatization revenues reached 37 billion euros till 2014. In early 90s, around 8 million people were employed by state-controlled companies. Today is just over 300,000. And in 1990, around 8,400 companies were state-controlled. Today, it's around 240. So these numbers show you where we come from, where we started, and where we are right now. Today, Minister of State Treasury is acting more like a fund manager, asset manager. We have exactly determined what companies we treat as a strategic ones, and we still have very, very few companies or minority stakes in them we can still privatize. But generally, big privatization is over, and I think everybody realizes it. There's few more projects to come, probably in the near future, years to come, but nothing like the size of the privatization which we experienced in the past. It will never be repeated. And obviously, Poland's position is completely different than in the early 90s and even in the 90s. Today, Poland as a country is not in need of massive capital inflows. And the economic numbers says it all. You know, when we add a current account and capital account together, we have a surplus of about 3% of GDP. So definitely privatization from the role of Minister of State Treasury has been changing over the last couple of years. For the future projects, we would see our role, as I mentioned, as asset manager. We would see next projects coming as not as a pure privatization, but as I would treat it as a capital injection. We have couple stocks were put aside by the decision of Council of Ministers in December, made in December 2012. Part of stocks of PKBP, PGE, and PZU were put aside as a capital injection to the Polish investment program. So this kind of transactions we can see coming when the need for the capitals come from either from BGK or Polish Development for Investments vehicle. So that's how it looks at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answers. Your answers are directing me to my next question. Basically, as you said, currently the Polish State Treasury is driving not only privatization policy, but is also actively supporting its companies. For instance, the current rights issue of Grupa Lotos, or in the past, rights issue for PKO Bank Polski. The question will be to Jarek Grzesiak to answer how, in his view, looking at the legal mechanism, government can support the national champions in achieving their strategic goals.
Thank you very much, Piotr, and good morning, everybody. I guess that's a very interesting question because we're meeting this year, and yesterday there's been a lot of discussions about the transformation. Until last year, that's no doubt Ministry of State Treasury was one of the major driver of the growth of the capital markets in Poland. The largest IPO has been driven by the State Treasury, and the question was what next? How in this role of switching more to the role of the asset manager, how ministry and how the capital markets could look like. And I think the transaction we are right in the middle or towards the end of completing this year, this is rights issue of Lotos. It's a perfect example of how State Treasury could be active at the capital markets and what can be done. What's the future? Couple points. First of all, there is a list of strategic companies where State Treasury obviously stated their interest that for the long time they'll be keeping either minority blocking stake or even the majority for the purpose of protection of anti-takeover and obviously securing the country's interest. Obviously, energy, infrastructure, etc. The list is available. Lotos is one of them. And then it comes the question, what the prudent owner, State Treasury, could do at the capital markets at the situation when, for example, like with Lotos, after the very ambitious 10-plus investment project, the access to the banking financing, it's limited. We've been debating this year, and exactly the use of certain funds, not exactly at the level of peer, not exactly of the level of BGK, finally was available. We discovered the possibility of using enterprise restructuring fund, which is available within the Ministry of State Treasury, which until this year was solely used for the state aid. And there was a tiny paragraph in the rules of the fund that also not state aid could be provided from the fund. If you look at the certain limitations, state treasury is obliged by the certain acts to keep certain level of the shareholdings. In respect of Lotos, that's 51%. So obviously, when it comes to the capital increase in the form of the rights issue, state treasury needs to find money and needs to find investor not to be diluted. One way was to find obviously other groups from a state treasury team, banks, other state-owned companies. However, this is not exactly how those limitations been set up. So this is like first time from this fund and the first time in the rights issue state treasury in fact found the method of becoming the prudent owner of co-investing. That's a pretty significant 1 billion increase of the share capital for Lotos. And I think we are answering the dilemma, which was, it was a valid question until this year. Will state treasury at all be able to be the owner which could participate in a further growth and maintaining and growing together with its companies when the time will come? I'm pretty confident that this is obviously one of the methods, and we can see the role of a state treasury, like Minister said, changing from being the leader, the driver of the capital markets to the prudent owner, the owner which will maintain in its possession all tools necessary to support company under state treasury supervision. I'll be very happy to answer detailed questions. However, this is so technical how it's being done, and we'll keep it until the end of a transaction, probably by the end of this year.
Jarek, thank you very much. Continuing the discussion of the role of the state treasury, I've mentioned it in the previous question, and Jarek, you also slightly elaborated on this, that the state treasury is supporting to building a national champions which are not only developing in Poland but also reaching outside Poland, for instance, the KGHM, or are very important, as you said, for the economic security in the country, oil and gas sector, utilities. Most of these companies, they are listed companies. Obviously, if you have a listed companies, you have a majority shareholder, such as state treasury, you have also the minorities, you need to have a proper cooperation. I would like to ask Minister Kowalczyk first, from his point of view, to say how he sees the cooperation with the minority investors, and I would also like to encourage the other panelists present today to make their comments, how they see the role both of the ministry as well as the minority shareholders in such companies.
Very interesting question. First of all, I would like to very strongly stress that I don't see much difference between the strategic shareholder on the private side and strategic shareholder on the public side. State is acting like any other member of the market and like any other strategic shareholder. So the main purpose and the main task for the state treasury is to increase the value, build the value of the company we hold a stake in. Over the examples you mentioned, like KGHM or oil and gas companies, we are the major shareholder. We hold a significant stock in KGHM. We support the investment program, and as a stockholder, as state treasury, we will support the company in building the value, which is quite natural for every kind of investor. There is no difference between private and public. If we look at the energy sector, it's a bit more complicated because we have national security matters involved in this. As one of my colleagues mentioned before, we have published a list of the strategic companies. Many companies which are from oil and gas are on our strategic list, which means that we will never allow. We would never let the control over that kind of companies out of our hands. Is Poland different than other countries? I would say we're pretty much in line with in countries in Western Europe. If you look at Sweden, there is around 54 state-owned companies. Norway has direct stakes in around 70 companies. Even France, not directly but indirectly through sovereign wealth funds, has a controlling stake or important stake in approximately 50 companies, not to mention EDF or GDF. So we pretty much are not different than any developed markets in Western Europe and pretty much and globally. On top of it, I would add that we are a member of the European Union. There are certain directives which cover the minority shareholder rights, and there are very tough regulations. And the Ministry of State Treasury, like any other member of the market, we have to obey these rules. Thank you.
In order to have a little debate, I'll perhaps add a few observations agreeing with everything what's being said. From a different perspective, state treasury, it is slightly different, and this is to the detriment of a state treasury. Because in fact, state treasury acts in many ways as a sovereign, as the ministry, as a fund, and there are simply more restrictions. In any new investment of the money, state treasury will be restricted in order to go certain procedures, which is not necessarily the case for the private investor. What I'm meaning is obviously defending the business case and showing that this is not state aid which is prohibited, or simply it has to be a certain procedure with Brussels in order to allow for the state aid. So for example, in our project, you have to go to the various tests, like a test of the private investor to demonstrate that even if this is just the increase of the share capital, or if this is any money invested by the state treasury, that's on a basis which is more or less equal base for the private investor to be engaged as well. This is a little bit more paperwork, and it's a little, obviously this is a new territory for the management of the public listed companies, that they have to understand the timing, and they have to understand that the preparation of the business plans, it will going to the higher level. In any projects we had at the capital market so far, it's been an equity story and the preparation of certain transactions in general. Now you have to go very deeply, analyze, look at the cost, look at the bottom line of each project to convince and to be ready to convince that this type of the increase is not really breaching state aid restrictions. It's one of many examples when state treasury simply has to do some time more work than any other investor when acting as a prudent owner.
I of course agree with you, but the question was a bit different about the relationship between the major shareholder and minorities. And on this basis, I don't see the difference between the private investor and the public investor.
Are there any other comments from the fellow panelists on that
Piotr,
question?
maybe 2 cents from me. Thanks for the question. Dzień dobry, witam, good morning. I think that there are different examples of various custodians of state assets across Central Eastern Europe. I will try to internationalize a little bit this discussion, given the fact that I cover various Central Eastern European markets from Baltics to Western Balkans at Goldman's. And you can influence decision-making directly by representing a respective ministry or government agency, national property fund, or various privatization agencies, as it is the case, especially in Southern Eastern Europe. And this is always very difficult because you have to go through a kind of bureaucratic process and request various reports from consultants if you want to embark on a new project, being M&A or a capital increase or whatever it is. Clearly from practical perspective and based on my experience, it was always easier to deal with just one single custodian of state assets, call it a sovereign wealth fund or call it Slovenian sovereign holding, one entity which consolidates under one roof all the state stakes, because in every case, whenever you have a transaction with a state-owned enterprise, you deal with the same entity. So this is just a little kind of addition from my point, Poland clearly is a lot more advanced in terms of privatization and post-privatization kind of thinking about the future, where other countries, and mind you, at the peak of the crisis, IMF was present on the ground in 9 Central Eastern European countries out of 20 plus. If not for the IMF, we would not be seeing certain privatizations which are being executed at the moment, especially across Southern Eastern Europe. But I guess we will come back a little bit to that subject and privatizations in the region.
Thank you very much. The next question is related to the existing new initiatives and potential new initiatives which could be taken in consideration while managing the state asset. For example, in Poland we have the PIR, National Polish Investment for Development. There are also some other ways of supporting the companies, the economies. We could think of the equity links, which are still not being developed neither by the state-controlled company nor in the private sector. The question is to Piotr, how Piotr, do you think the PIR and the other ways of introducing the new product could look in the future on the Polish as well as on the regional market? And Rafael, thank you very much for slightly internationalizing. So I would like that, which as in the next questions we'll be speaking more about the regional perspective, not only the Polish one.
Thank you very much for this question. I believe this question actually follows or refers to the other subjects which were already raised. Like, for example, the sort of, maybe not conflict, but still consideration how to raise funding as state has to also hold, for various reasons, some significant interest in particular companies for strategic reasons, for national safety, and other that sort of reasons. And still, those companies, those assets cannot develop without further funding. So, of course, there are funding coming from debt, also from some equity raising, but still there is potentially, we may say, some sort of limit to it if we still want to have significant control over those assets. And there are, I believe, some instruments on the market which are still not being widely used, which we can consider, and I think we are coming to the time when we should consider them, assuming or looking at the situation with privatization process, that basically this privatization process is reaching its limits for fundraising. I mean, in a straight way of selling stocks or raising capital by equity without significant impact on losing control. So there are some ways how to actually address that problem in such a situation. So one of this is creating funds or using existing infrastructure funds. Polish Investments for Development, this is a project supported by Polish government, basically, and behind this idea, which the goal of which is to invest in development of infrastructure and other very important projects for the country. Behind this idea is to fund this fund through money coming from holdings which the state has in particular companies which are typically listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, and this seems to be a source of funds. So the funds could be raised for this Polish Investments for Development through outright sale on the market, through IBB process, but also we believe other ways could be used, like, for example, equity-linked products, hybrid products, which have underlying stocks of those listed companies, but also do not do not create situation that the state is losing control over them, right? So there is not an outright sale, or at least immediate outright sale. For example, convertibles, which are not used in Poland and CEE to wide extent. And an example, numeric example, since this beginning of this year, over 40 transactions on convertibles happened in Europe, raising over 13 billion euro. And I believe there is potentially only one from Central and Eastern Europe, from CEZ. This is the only one issuance of convertibles. Why not the others? Why our utility companies cannot raise convertibles, for example, when the sellout or disposal of equity, which is underlying this convertible, is done with premium and in the period of 3 to 5 years, for example. Also, to be honest, these convertibles could be structured this way that at the end the settlement is in cash. So actually there is no need to dispose those shares. And there are also other instruments like this, like equity swaps, like other various derivatives, which create such opportunities. I think this is a time when we should basically consider this, whether on a state treasury level or at the level of funds like PIR, like Polish Investments for Development, or purely the particular companies. Also with PIR and with infrastructure funds, there is another angle which we can consider now. Utilities, especially utilities, they have a lot of assets which attract infrastructure funds. And to be honest, when we are meeting some infrastructure funds, global infrastructure funds, huge funds, they are crying for opportunities in Poland. There are very few examples that they invest in Poland, especially in heating assets. This is being sold by local communities, by cities, basically. And here the infrastructure funds are investing. Also, there's one case in Seaport, in Tri-City, where a huge fund, Macquarie, has invested a lot of money. But there are other assets like electricity, like gas pipes, which, especially electricity assets, which are really attractive for those funds. And I can imagine a situation that those funds can simply invest to buy minority holding, sit on those holdings for, I don't know, 20 years in that perspective, and the utility got funding for further investments. We are not using this, and I think that new or modified model of state as an asset manager, I think we should consider also these various levels of other activities which can meet the situation that we are not losing control over the assets, to keep the strategic goals of national safety, economic safety, etc., and still we are able to raise funding. Thank you.
My comment on this, because in my previous role I was managing the public debt, and I did have a lot of offers for convertibles, and we still have them. I know it's a quite nice product for investment banks, but if we look generally at the low rating environment at the moment, I mean, Polish 10-year Treasury trades around 275. From the Ministry of Finance point of view, from the public debt management point of view, from the economic, and if we look at economics, because it's not a simple transactions, there is no issue of that. There is no issue to get the funding for the budget deficit to roll over the debt these days. Generally, we don't have a problem with financing of our budget. The question and the big challenge for Poland in the future is to get out of the EDP excessive deficit procedure. And in this case, we need more dividend inflows. We need more budget revenues. So if you give up dividend for smaller interest paid on your debt, it just economically doesn't make sense. And as far as municipalities, as far as infrastructure in utilities investment is concerned, PEER together with BGK, they kicked off the new fund, I would call it local government infrastructure fund, which actually should help local governments, mainly cities, in the areas of water supply, waste burning facilities, maybe also airports, to free up the capital they have invested in this companies, and it could be also a way for the future if there is a will from the municipalities to be listed on stock exchange. And I agree with it. It's a perfect product for long-term investors like pension funds. Thank you.
Maybe just one also comment. Of course, using such instruments, various aspects should be considered, including, of course, the state debt and level of debt. That's absolutely sure. However, this chess transaction, as I can recall, it was the coupon of this bond was 0. So in this case, really this debt seems very cheap. Why? This is obvious because the investors are adding to the value of the option of taking over the shares. But also in respect of dividends, those instruments which I mentioned, they have this feature that actually they do not require give up dividends. Actually, the dividend is still taken by the owner of the shares. So from that perspective, these instruments could be pretty attractive also from that perspective, that we are getting funding for the underlying stocks, but we are not giving up dividends. We are still taking dividends, and we are still holding rights, corporate rights from the stock. This is the basic positive feature. Of course, there's pluses and minuses. There are also minuses of these instruments. The point is that I believe that we should maybe consider some of them to look for other opportunities of raising funds at lower cost and which can provide still features which we are looking at from the very strategic point of view. Thank you.
Piotr, a quick comment. Yes, I like your discussion around convertible instruments, and we would like to see a lot more of them in this country. We are talking about large utilities, energy, gas, power providers, and you don't have a lot of those which are publicly listed, which are liquid, which are of substantial, meaningful size. ČEZ is still a state-controlled, heavy state-influenced company. MOL would be a good example, but government has a minority stake, would be a potential candidate for that. Maybe Petrol in Slovenia, but I hope that we'll be seeing more of those from countries like, for instance, Romania, when you've got a lot of energy companies now listed on the stock exchange, and some of them are even listed through GDRs on the London Stock Exchange. But another point on your subject of raising funds but not losing control of the assets, I'm just thinking about this new trend now in Southern Eastern Europe, concession monetization, privatization of ownership, of management, but not ownership. So look at the transaction, I think it was 2005, concession of the Budapest airport. That predominantly applies to big infrastructure projects, or the ongoing transaction right now in Croatia, and I applaud the Croatian government for embarking on this transaction, namely is the privatization of the motorways network. Almost 99% or so of the whole motorways network in the country, over 1,000 kilometers, which will go to a consortium of a strategic operator together with some financial partners for the next 40 or maybe 50 years. And they will increase efficiency, they will modernize the toll collecting system. They will even expand because they may construct new sections of the motorways or widen the existing motorways. So this is, I think, a good example to follow. We know that, for instance, Slovenia has a similar situation. There is a state-owned company, DARS, which controls most of the motorways in the country, and they are very keenly and diligently monitoring what is going on in Croatia and what will be the final outcome of that transaction. For those in the audience, especially from Poland, there is a number of countries, also next door, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, which invested heavily before getting access to EU funds for development, for harmonization. So they are sitting on these very big infrastructure companies operating their motorways and are heavily indebted. So that's another way for, I guess.
Thank you, everybody, for this lively discussion. I think, Rafa, you are directing me towards the next question, because we are commenting here and there about the CE as a region, about also the ways of privatizations in the CE, as well as a lesson learned and different models as a state across the CE. So, if I could ask Rafa first, you comment on this across the CE, and then the next question after your answer would be to Nadeza, to give us a little bit of a dive into this situation in Serbia. So that would be the plan for the discussion, if possible.
Thank you, Piotr. Let's start from the beginning. So privatization really involves the transfer of economic activity from the public sector to the private sector. And we've observed different objectives relative to different governments embarking on privatizations, and not just in Central Eastern Europe, but also outside. When you look at the very first attempts, Baroness Thatcher, when she started in late 70s, this was all about restructuring of a very inefficient industry sector. When you look at the latest attempts by the Australian government, that's dictated by the fact that commodities prices are going down, right? So this is the fiscal benefit of the, as you mentioned, at the very beginning of privatization. Japan, which needed to kind of reconstruct and rebuild the areas devastated by tsunami or earthquakes, is now finally open to allow foreigners to invest in postal services or in aviation sector. But I think apart from those very obvious advantages of privatizations, enhancement of corporate governance and profit maximization, diversification of the shareholder base, change of the management, and subjecting your state-owned enterprises to market discipline. I think that the one fundamental difference between other countries and our region is that before even commencing EU accession negotiations with Brussels, we needed to show that we've got a functioning market economy. So privatization for us was a fundamental pillar of structural reforms, basically introducing market economy. I think that was the fundamental reason why we embarked on those privatizations very early on. The most popular model, I think, between Mongolia and Slovenia was the so-called mass privatization. So sometimes here in this part of Eastern Europe is referred as the, I believe, voucher privatization, with which we also experienced that in this country. And it was a very kind of appealing idea for politicians because, gave the citizens a sense of participation and inclusion. We know how that ended, especially in countries further east, when you've got a number of insiders accumulating stakes by basically buying them up from poor and uneducated pensioners, for the lack of better words, and that's why in certain countries, particularly in former Soviet Union, privatization does not have a good connotation. The model which is a lot more popular here, by the way, one caveat about Polish mass privatization is that instead of receiving certificates to exchange them directly into shares in state-owned enterprises, in Poland we could exchange them into the shares in government-controlled funds, which were subsequently listed on their Warsaw Stock Exchange. We are more familiar with trade sales, so basically divestitures of government stakes directly to strategics or to financial sponsors, something not very popular outside of Poland, I would say, and IPOs, so that's Poland and especially Romania recently. But I think that in this regard, I have to mention Estonia and Hungary because they really started very early on in early 90s. Just to give you an example, by 1999, over 80% of Estonian GDP was generated by the private sector, mostly foreign control. So they were a lot ahead of the rest of the pack. But I would focus on, we can mention other kind of variations like the employee ownership program, especially Slovenia, when the management teams received cheap loans from their friendly credit officers from state-owned banks. Again, no change of quasi-shareholding, no change of the, no bringing of competence and know-how, no enhanced corporate governance. And that's basically the result, which we see now that for the first time since the last, 17, 20 years, Slovenia has to embark on proper privatizations. But there are two other interesting examples of privatization methodologies not so popular here, and one of them would be restitution, which is a type of privatization. It's about return of property, of assets, could be anything, a church, a factory, an apartment, a building, a forest, to former owners and now to their successors who lost these properties under in communist era. And I think that a very good example would be the restitution fund from Romania, which is really a very, very special entity set up by the Romanian government back in 2005, where the claimants, former owners of assets in Romania, were given shares directly in the fund. The fund was subsequently listed on the Bucharest Stock Exchange back in January 2011, and most of those Romanian citizens who were the claimants, they sold their stakes. So the end result now is that Property Fund of Romania basically has over 50 or 60% of international portfolio investors as their shareholders. Total assets of that fund, something around 3 billion euros, but net asset value over 3 billion euros. But I think that the market cap is under 3 billion, which means that it is trading at a discount to NAV. So no wonder that the management of the fund is pushing for secondary listing on the London Stock Exchange, which I think will be a phenomenal, massive branding exercise, not just for the fund, for Romania, because the fund really serves as a great proxy for the country, for the sovereign. It is skewed, biased somehow towards energy utility sector, but that's Romania. This is the unique feature of that country, which in terms of territory population is second largest to Poland. In terms of GDP, it's the third largest after Poland and the Czech Republic, and it is probably the only in our region which is self-sufficient in terms of energy, with their own gas and oil and very kind of resource-rich country. But the most interesting feature about this restitution fund is that the Romanian government decided to outsource investment management to a single investment fund through a very competitive process. Ultimately, that task was awarded to Franklin Templeton, which is a phenomenal, a very outspoken promoter of Western corporate governance standards to be introduced to Romanian companies. Mind you, in their portfolio now, it is a closed-end fund. Technically, it's the largest in the world listed closed-end fund. They've got, I believe, 56, something under 60 companies, 1/3 of which is publicly listed. And these are the largest state-controlled companies in the country, managed by Franklin Templeton, which makes independent decisions whether to do another ABO, whether to sell, divest their stake. So this is a very, very unique way of managing restitution in Central Eastern Europe in a very kind of professional and transparent way. And one more thing which I wanted to mention, which we a little bit discussed earlier, is that concession monetization, because this is a new type of privatization model, a lot more popular in Western Europe, especially when it comes to big infrastructure assets, which now I believe we will see a lot more in our countries, especially in terms of operating and management of airports and motorways and whatnot. I think that's about from my end for now.
Nadeza, I think you've been listening to us for quite a while, so I think as said before Rafael's last answer is, if you can give us a deep dive into the situation in your home country. So what's your experience from the past? What are your plans? What are your current activities, as well as also what are your plans for the future in terms of the privatization and the managing of the state-controlled assets?
Thanks for your question. Privatization started in Serbia back in the 90s, like in Poland. But this, unlike other countries, developing countries, it's still in progress, and it's very topical question right now in Serbia. In the beginning of the 90s, those first, let's say, 10 years of privatization, that was not mandatory privatization. That was more optional, and it referred to distribution of shares to employees. Then in 2001, the law on privatization was passed, and privatization agency was created as an institution to implement, control, and supervise the privatization procedure. Within this law, there were two basic concepts of privatization. One referred to public tender, which was for strategic partners, and the other method was public auction, which was for all other buyers. Now, if we look back, the results are different. The companies that were privatized by public tender procedure, they did increase their business operations because the strategic buyer improved the organization, while and only 10% of total number of companies that were privatized within this method. On the other hand, the companies privatized within public auction method, those are the more questionable ones, because 15% of those privatization contracts were terminated because at the point we didn't have strategic buyers for those companies, and we had investors with questionable capital and who could not fulfill all their agreement obligations. So after termination of those privatization contracts, those companies came back with much worse financial performance. They came back to our portfolio of privatization agency, and as of right now, we have over 500 companies with state-owned and socially owned companies. In August this year, the new law was passed, the new law on privatization, which is a very big topic right now in Serbia, because this new law is more flexible, and it gives more opportunity to investors, because within this new concept, the method of sale will be based on the interest of investors. So here we kept the traditional method of sale of capital. Then we have a sale of assets, and we also have strategic partnership as one of potential methods of sale. As we talked, yes, and regarding the new law, privatization agency announced public invitation for all of those companies from the portfolio for investors to submit their letters of interest. Based on the interest, privatization agency will propose the model and method of privatization. So within next month, we should have definite decision on how each company should be privatized. Now, we talked a little bit about state's role in asset management. Now it's difficult to talk from perspective of Serbia since we are still in this standard privatization, but we can say that one of the options of government, one of them is provided by the new law, which is strategic partnership. And besides the model of the company's capital increase by interested investors, the greatest the greatest attention is drawn to the possibility of founding a new company through JV, where state's stake shall be the property that the state will bring into the new company based on the claims they had with the previous company, and the investors' stake shall be cash, property, or rights. Of course, this method of privatization will only be applied to companies of strategic importance. Then another option of the government of improving asset management is PPP. We did not have a lot of success with this in the past since we did not have regulations. But this is why the launching and implementation of PPP in financing state investments is not only important for reaching the goals in the field of infrastructure, but also for stimulating foreign investments aimed at creation of new jobs as well. And also another topic that we've heard today is corporatization of public utility companies. These companies are pretty important for Serbian economy since fixed assets of those companies make up to 30% of fixed assets of all companies in Serbia, and only 17% of those top 17 of those companies generate 20% of our economy revenue. So these companies are very important, and maybe putting these companies on stock exchange could enable development of our stock exchange and capital markets. Right now there are so many in our capital market. It's very undeveloped. Many of those companies listed are joint stock companies that are currently excuse me, in privatization agency portfolio. So we hope that we will clean the bowl within standard privatization that is taking place right now, and maybe later on we hope to see some development in our capital markets in the future, of course.
Thank you very much. Perhaps one additional point or question, because obviously we spoke about the privatization, and earlier on we were discussing like the asset management. So it's obviously you are not at that level yet, but probably there are some companies or some areas that you are not keen to privatize, or there are not plans for the privatization. If you could comment on that point.
Well, there are companies in our portfolio right now that we are still not sure whether they will be privatized or not. Those are some large mining companies. We do have some companies, very large pharmaceutical companies. We do have Petrochemia, one of our larger exporters, which we still do not know whether they will go privatized. They will be privatized or not. We should know that within next month or so, when we have to make the final decision.
Piotr, in this regard, in terms of categorizations of assets that you have in your portfolio and which of those are strategic or not, I think that there is a good example from Slovenia, and the latest move. It's not a new idea, because there was a law which already was introduced 2 years ago, but it was finally implemented earlier this year in Slovenia to put all the state stakes into one consolidated entity, the sovereign holding, and you've got basically all the state stakes sitting under one roof. I think that only exception is the gas electricity transmission companies, and the Slovenian government in the next month or two will embark on categorization exercise, but they're very specific. So certain assets which are strategic means that you keep control, and that's really minimum, like 50% plus one share. Then you've got the second category, which is important, so that will be a blocking minority, 25% plus one, and then portfolio. So basically, those stakes will be up for sale, and it will be up to the, I guess, management of that holding, in agreement with their supervisory board, which stakes will be divested in what kind of order. But it is a good example, really aspirational model for other countries in Central Europe to put together. It's a very kind of efficient and transparent model to put together all the stakes under one roof, and you can still be represented through your representative on the supervisory board, so that you can still influence decisions, who gets sold and at what stage.
Thank you very much for this edition. We are almost approaching the end of our panel, but before the end, I would like to ask one additional question to Minister Kowalczyk. You've mentioned, you've mentioned that the large privatization are over, but you also in the second sentence mentioned that there are still some projects that you are working. So if you could shed a little bit of the lights on your plans in terms of the privatization in the coming years.
I cannot reveal everything. There has to be some secretive nature of our business. Definitely, as I said, when the need comes for the capital injection to Polish investment program, then we will be ready. It is kind of a privatization. That kind of transactions like we did in July this year, ABB on PGE, which was quite a successful one, although the small size. As I said before, the stocks put aside by the decision of Council of Ministers in 2012, but I repeat, which is portions of PGE, PKO, BP, and PZU. But the major role will be to inject capital again into real economy. So, big privatization is over. I already said that. Small projects are still there, but this is not a sizable projects. We have a lot of, like I said, around 200 companies still when we have some small stakes. Some of them have to be were received by employees. Some of them are very complicated projects. It's a well-known thing that Polish Post is announced that they want to do the IPO. We think that Minister of Treasury will be involved in that project. We'll see how the political calendar helps in this thing. As we all know, it's not easy. Generally, I would say Minister of State Treasury will improve, and it is improving our asset management skills, and we really are focused on building the value of the stocks we are holding right now, and we will be looking for synergies. We want to prove, and I think we already did prove, that we can be very good asset manager as a state Minister of State Treasury.
Thank you very much for that. I think with that question, I would like to conclude our panel. I would like to thank once again the audience for being with us, and I would like to thank the distinguished members of the panel for discussing the ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.